Hello everyone, this is Carrot Soup from the Soups channel, and today I'll be talking about the equipment selection and purchase. At level 50, you realize that there are different sets of gold equipment and that they give you different stats. So at that point, it's actually okay to use any of them because the level 50 gold equipment are only temporary and you'll change them out as soon as you reach level 60. At level 60, however, you should take note of what equipment you use as they will stay with you throughout the game. There will be no level 70 equipment drops and you'll need to level up your equipment from level 60 to 70. Something like this. You need 125 crystals and one of the equipment emblem to level it up from 60 to 70. And the same from 70 to 80. So, while choosing your equipment, you'll realize that there are 4 different sets of equipment. Mainly, they are the Eternal Storm set that I'm using right now. It's called Eternal Thunder now because it's level 70, but it's actually just Eternal Storm set. So, for my Eternal Storm set, it gives you crit rate and ignore defense in some cases. And the 4 set effect gives you crit damage, like 10% extra crit damage if you land a critical hit on your target. So for the other set, I'll show you from the gear ranking because I don't use them myself. First, the other set is the Shield of Eternal set, which gives you crit damage reduction and some reflect rate after you advance them. The 4 set effect gives you extra 15% crit damage reduction, so in total it's actually quite a bit of crit damage reduction. The third set is the Unwavering Oath set, which gives you block chance, block damage, and healing done. The 4th set effect gives you extra 8% of block chance and 10% of healing done. You also have to take note that for the equipment, when you actually identify them, there may be chances of some stats not being there. For example, in this case, where this poor guy has no healing done for his equipment, even though they are the same Unwavering Oath set from the first one, you realize that healing done is actually missing for both the single piece equipment and for the set effect. So do take note when you actually identify your equipment before you start using them, and then you can decide whether you are okay with this or not. The last set is the Nightfall Shadow set. It gives you dodge, also known as evasion in other games, and the set effect gives you physical dodge and magical dodge, 3% each. So, which set should you use? From what I know, in most cases, DPS classes like Berserker, Ninja, Asura, and Pyromancer, basically any class that's not tanky or do any healing will get the Eternal Storm set because it gives you crit rate and ignore defense. And the 4 set effect of crit damage will increase your overall damage dealt. So you can actually check your crit rate and crit damage here, and it will tell you exactly how much damage you'll be dealing if you land a critical strike. So by actually getting the Eternal Storm set for DPS classes, you actually increase your damage dealt by a lot, not only because of the crit rate and the crit damage, but also because of this ignore defense stat, which is also a form of defense penetration. Yep. So how about the Shield of Eternal set? Who mainly uses them? Well, that's Paladin or some summoners who want to be tankers. They will opt to choose them because of the crit damage reduction. This is to prevent them getting burst by the DPS classes, and they also give some form of reflect rate which reflects some of the damage, and in order to be able to utilize this stat, you need to be tanky enough. So it's not logical for squishy classes like Frostweaver for example to actually use them. Some berserkers also choose to use them, like Molo over here, because he don't want to be bursted by other classes like ninjas and asura, because he's a berserker which is also quite squishy. Another equipment, the next one, the Unwavering Oath set, is mainly used by the healers such as clerics and some rangers who want to have some form of healing because of this healing done stat and the block chance stat. Similarly, like the tankers is to prevent getting burst by the DPS classes. The last one, the Nightfall Shadow set, typically most assassin classes in other games would be equipping this equipment, but in this game I seldom see ninja or asura using them, because if they use this set which gives them dodge and evasion, they would be they'll be missing out on the DPS that would be coming from the Eternal Storm set. So I seldom see any class actually use this Nightfall Shadow set. So as you can see from my inventory here, I have actually collected all 4 sets of the Eternal Storm set and have the 4 set effect of crit damage reduction. Only at this point would I actually level up my equipment from level 60 to 70, or will I reforge the equipment. The reason for this is because if you actually level up or reforge the wrong equipment that best complements your class, if you want to change them, you will need to buy this magic extraction bottle from the spiral shop, which costs you 350 gift or paid spirals. So as you can see, there are 7 pieces of equipment. So if you were to buy a magic extraction bottle for all of them, it would cost you quite a sum of spirals, mainly 2450. I've just calculated it, and it's actually quite a huge amount. You also notice that the price for the magic extraction bottle and the enhancement gem 2 is the same. So you would be, by buying 7 magic extraction bottle for equipment, you will also be missing out 7 enhancement gem 2, which you will need for enhancing your equipment from plus 13 to plus 15, because the chances of success is only 12 on 13 to 14 and 10 from 14 to 15. So getting the equipment from plus 13 to 15 without any gem is near impossible, because you need to have consecutive pass. So another reason for not reforging or leveling up is because of the cost difference. It will be a huge waste of resources if you reforge before you get the correct one. I'll do the comparison right here for you guys. If you reroll or reforge the equipment at level 60, it costs you 64 adamantine and just 10k silver stars. If you reforge them at 70 instead, it will cost you 80 adamantine and 15k silver stars. If you lock a stat at level 60, it costs you 96 adamantine and 18 crystals. If you lock it at 70, it costs you 24 crystals and 120 adamantine for each reroll. Not to mention, if you actually chose to lock 2 stats, it will actually cost even more. 70 crystals and 160 adamantine for level 70, and 54 crystals and 128 adamantine. So as you can see, it's almost 1.5 times of the amount you need. And you don't always get the stats you want in a few rolls. For example, look at mine, Talisman. It took me 53 rolls before I get a yellow stat and a purple stats. And depending on your luck, it may cost you even more rolls. So if you multiply the extra in cost by 53 times, like me here, it will come up to a very big amount. If you are actually noticing or notice the material prices, you realize that crystal costs 45,000 shells each, and the adamantine costs 13.5 thousand if you buy it from player, and 45,000 shells, same as the crystals if you buy it from the shop. And I also like to mention that crystals can only be obtained from smelting your level 60 equipment. So it's not wise to just waste them away on locking stats at a higher cost. Since we are here, I also like to mention that you should only lock stats that are gold instead of purple, because it's harder to get gold stats, and even if you lock the purple stat, you might take a while before you get a gold stat, so it's just not worth the resource of the crystals just to keep the purple stat. Okay, moving on, how about the weapon, the gloves, and the talisman? You'll notice that they are not in a set, and you can actually make do with any of them if you are a casual player and you are not that bothered by the mix of stats in your equipment. But you will also realize that there are many different types of equipment for the weapon, gloves, and talisman. So why not get the best equipment that best complements your armor set? So for example, for this Celestial Judgment, also known as the Apocalypse at level 60, they give you crit and ignore defense as well. So if you actually use both the Eternal Storm set and the sets which give crit rate for your other three equipment, they will add quite a bit of percentage to the stat that you are using, which would actually be very beneficial in the long run. So you may be asking yourself why go to such lengths, and that is very troublesome to do this. However, if you value your damage dealt, if you are a DPS classes, or your tankiness and healing if you are a tanker or healer, the extra stats from this actually will really help you a lot in the later in the game, because they are, if you didn't choose them, other people will have them and you won't. So that will make quite a bit of difference. So if let's say you decide to opt in on using the same set, one problem that you will definitely face is the price of the equipment. I'm sure you realize that the equipment for some of them is actually very expensive, and like example here, my chest armor costs 7 million shells, and let's see. So but you also realize that some equipment costs very cheap, and that's what I'm going to be talking about now. I understand this problem and I faced them myself. Most of the equipment I've bought at first cost 10 to 15 million each, like my armor and my weapon here, and you have to find ways to minimize the cost. But I also like to mention that from the second piece of equipment I get onwards, each of them costs less than 3 million shells, and from the second piece of equipment I buy until I get all the crit set, the complete set of crit, I spend less than 30 million shells. Yes, and how do I do this? I actually monitored the price of the equipment and only buy them when they are at the lowest, at the price floor of 2.6M for the equipment at level 60. And not only that, I went on a step further and I even monitored the prices for the other classes. Why would I do this? Because previously you can actually buy the equipment from other classes, and after the job change, I actually converted my class and equipped them. So by now the developers would have patched this and you cannot buy equipment from other classes. But what you can do now is to do a class change into the cheaper classes which sell you third cheap equipment. The developers had actually provided you with a free job change book which allows you to change your book for free at one time. So you can actually use that by calculating which classes equipment is the cheapest. And personally, I'll recommend Frost Weavers, which is what I did because I was originally a berserker. The equipment I bought are actually very cheap. It's lower than what is shown here because people are buying up the equipment after they hit the lowest price and now they have shot up again. Another one is Pyromancer, which less people play, very little people play actually. So you guys can consider and monitor for yourself because different classes have different cheap equipment. So you guys can check for yourself and see which classes are the one that gives you the most benefits when you change them. All this takes just a little bit of time and effort, and you'll be able to do it like me, having a full set of equipment and not spending a lot. All it takes is just 3M from the class book, which you'll need when you change back from the class that you change into for the cheap equipment, and 21 days. So if you are quite into the game like me, 21 days is actually not a very long time because it's just 3 weeks. So yep. And I also like to mention that with the level 80 unlock this week, people will be scrambling for the level 70 and 80 emblems instead of the level 60 equipment. So it would actually be even cheaper compared to before for the equipment. So that's all I have for you guys, and if you like the content, to give us a like and subscribe, and you'll know when we actually have more updates about all the technical parts of the game. Okay, bye.